So first point. Oh, I get to do that, don't I? There we go. Following God wholeheartedly in youth and middle age. I wanted it to be youth, but it didn't really work that way. So we're going to look at two passages. We're going to look at Numbers from chapter 13 and from verse 13. And then later on, we'll look at Joshua 14. Those are the only two main passages that we'll look at. Actually, we'll do a little aside in the middle. So Numbers 13, verse 1. And it says, the Lord said to Moses, send some men to explore the land of Canaan, which I am giving to the Israelites. From each ancestral tribe, send one of its leaders. So at the Lord's command, Moses sent them out from the desert of Paran. All of them were leaders of the Israelites. And then it goes through and it names 12 different people. And one of them is Joshua, who we hear about lots. And the other one is, in verse 6, from the tribe of Judah, Caleb, son of Jephunneh. And okay, so, it even works. So the Israelites had left Israel. They'd then gone through the Sinai Peninsula. They got the 10 Commandments at Mount Sinai. That's a great place to go. I had a holiday down there one time. And then they'd work their way up to Kadesh Barnea, here, where the blue area is, okay? So that's where they were. They all camped out there. It hadn't taken that long to get there. And it says, what do we know about Caleb? So there were 12 people from all of the 3 million men that were the Israelites, and there was a leader from each tribe. And Caleb was picked as one of those men from all of those tribes, from 3 men. So it's pretty cool to be picked by your tribe to be a leader of that. And it then says, we'll skip down to verse 21. So they went up and explored the land from the desert of Zin as far as Rehob towards Lebo Hamath. They went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Haman, Sheshai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. When they reached the valley of Eshcol, they cut off a branch bearing a single cluster of grapes. 2 of them carried it on a pole between them, along with some pomegranates and figs. That sounds good, doesn't it? That place was called the Valley of Eshcol because of the cluster of grapes the Israelites cut off there. At the end of 40 days, they returned from exploring the land. So they were spies. They were spying out for God. And this is the route. This is what people think the route is. So they came off from Kadesh Barnea all the way up to here. The whole length of Israel they went, and then all the way down. And that is about, return trip, about 600 kilometers. And it's about 8,000 meters of climbing. That's the height of Everest. So it's a good old trip in 40 days. I mean, Pete could do it in 3 days, but, you know, for the rest of us, that's a good old trip to do. So you've got to think about who's going to be picked for this. You had to be strong enough to do this. You know, I mean, that's a significant challenge. You had to be courageous enough. You're going behind enemy lines. You know, it'd be like some of the guys out, Ukrainians going out behind enemy lines into the Russian territories there. You had to covert, reconnaissance, dress up and get by. You had to be cunning like that. If you're caught, you're likely to be imprisoned, tortured, murdered. You know, it wasn't exactly Geneva Convention around then. So courage is important. You know, and let's remember in Revelation, one of the sins is cowardice. You know, no cowardice on this. And they came back, verse 26. They came back to Moses and Aaron, the whole Israelite community at Kadesh in the desert of Paran, where they reported to them in the whole assembly and showed them the fruit of the land. And they gave Moses an account. We went into the land to which you sent us, and it does flow with milk and honey. Here is its fruit. But the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw descendants of Anak there. The Amalekites live in the Negev. The Hittites, Jebusites, and Amorites live in the hill country. And the Canaanites live near the sea and along the Jordan. Then Caleb silenced the people before Moses and said, we should go up and take possession of the land, for we can certainly do it. But the men who'd gone up with him said, we can't attack these people. They're stronger than we are. And they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they'd explored. So this is the first time we hear of Caleb, and he silenced the people. He had a strength of character and boldness to silence the people. He was a man of conviction. even amongst his spiritual brothers. He was a man, he was a man, thank you. He was a man not afraid to stand up, not afraid to have different opinions from those amongst him. He had faith. He believed God could work. He'd gone with 11 others, seen the problems and sizes of opposition, yet when 10 were fearful, and talked about the problem, he didn't. But the people, moving down to Numbers 14, verse 3, the people didn't trust him. They didn't trust God. They grumbled. And in verse 3 of chapter 14, it says, wouldn't it be better for us to go back to Egypt? And they said to each other, we should choose a leader and go back to Egypt. And again, we hear in verse 6 that Caleb and Joshua tried to persuade them. Joshua, son of Nun, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had explored the land, tore their clothes and said to the entire Israelite assembly, the land we passed through and explored is exceedingly good. If the Lord is pleased with us, he will lead us into that land, a land flowing with milk and honey, and will give it to us. Only do not rebel against the Lord, and do not be afraid of the people of the land, because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. Do not be afraid of them. But verse 10, the whole assembly talked about stoning them. Yeah, a bit rough, eh? When you have some conviction and somebody talks about it. Caleb and Joshua were distraught about the sin of their brothers. Tearing clothes, that means that your heart is... And the question we have is, when we see the sin of our brothers, because that's what this means, is when we see the sin of our brothers, are we distraught? There's another point, which I think is the main one of this, I got from it, I started off just thinking this is just Caleb. And that's what I came to do this class about. But actually, I came to the conviction it wasn't. It was Caleb and Joshua. Like-minded spiritual friends. There were 12 of them that went, 10 were fearful, unfaithful, but there was Caleb and Joshua. And the point I got from it, the thing I thought, is how much I need to have somebody. I need a Joshua. How much I need somebody who's like-minded, who has spiritual conviction. It reminded me, and I messaged it actually, it reminded me of Rubik, when Rubik and I were in the Riverside a long time ago, and things were pretty rough spiritually there at some point. Not the people who are here from the Riverside, Paul, no, not coming. But there were some rough times there. And Rubik and I spent a lot of time together, and it felt like that we needed each other, to keep each other spiritual when it wasn't. It also reminded me of Simon Dinning. I'm doing a lot of the teaching stuff. I'm learning a lot from him. He's definitely a Joshua for me. He's somebody I can learn a great of. I think about Pete. I think about Chris Watkins. That's somebody I want to develop that relationship with. It's not exactly there at the moment. I think about somebody who, together with me, we will speak with conviction, that we will have a godly conviction. We will stand up from God and have that when people around won't. They argue that do not be afraid of the people of the land because we will devour them. Their protection is gone, but the Lord is with us. They believe this. It was a spiritual role. They said, we could do anything. That's what Joshua and Caleb thought. Looking down at verse 10, God got angry. It says, then the glory of the Lord appeared at the tent of meeting to all the Israelites. The Lord said to Moses, how long will these people treat me with contempt? How long will they refuse to believe in me, in spite of all the signs I've performed among them? I will strike them down with a plague and destroy them, but I will make you into a nation greater and stronger than he. The cowardice of the Israelites really distressed God. And actually, it was Moses who begged and persuaded God not to intercede, not to kill them all off. God said, you must wander the desert for 40 years because of your sin, until they had all died of old age. And Numbers 14, verse 22, it says, not one of those who saw my glory and the signs I performed in Egypt and in the wilderness, but who disobeyed me and tested me 10 times, not one of them will ever see the land I promised on oath to their ancestors. No one who has treated me with contempt will ever see it. But because my servant Caleb has a different spirit and follows me wholeheartedly, I will bring him into the land he went to, and his descendants will inherit it. You see God's conviction about faithlessness and cowardice. And we see Caleb. I mean, what a great thing to be told by God, to be singled out and said, you have a spirit, you follow me wholehearted. And that phrase, follow me wholehearted, runs through describing Caleb. And I just think there's nothing better to feel the love and praise of our God. And I think about people here. I think, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't it be great? Joshua's right. Joshua has a different spirit. He follows God wholeheartedly. Tim has a different spirit. He follows me wholeheartedly. That's something that we should aspire to believe that, to see that in God. So the main point from this scripture, who is your Joshua? That's what made me think about. Who is your Joshua? We need somebody like that. Every one of us does. All right, the next point is a bit weird. I've got to say this. It's disappearing. So Joshua and Caleb this is a really odd point, okay? You're going to work with me on this one. And it might be wrong. I might be expecting a conversation from someone to say, James, that was a bit dodgy. But let's give it a go. So Joshua and Caleb were this amazing spiritual double act that we saw them together, did it together. In fact, if anything, Caleb seems to come out a bit stronger. But then Joshua was chosen by God as Moses' successor. And the Bible just talks about Joshua, and God spoke to him. He was by Moses' side as they conquered nations. And when Moses died, he was there and he was anointed. And then he led the entire people. It was him who crossed the Jordan, the water split. He led them into the promised land. They conquered Jericho. They conquered all these places. And it doesn't mention Caleb once. He just disappears. And it's really weird. Where does he go? What does he do? And actually, I have no idea. And in the absence of any verses at all about Caleb, I just thought, and I might be wrong about him. It may be that when I go to heaven, I find out that he was this amazing spiritual guy. He was just in the background, but he did all these incredible things. But I just wonder what happened for 45 years. It doesn't mention once in the desert. It doesn't mention once. So I just reflected when I read this about how I have disappeared in the past, spiritually on my Christian walk. And I think I've done it twice. As a young man, I went on the Liverpool mission team and I got a bit burnt out. I got very burnt out by that. And I came back to my parents and I came back with my tail between my legs and I just disappeared. Came to church, came along, went on dates, came on Sundays, midweeks, but I just disappeared. And things changed. And then also at the end of the Riverside, I did lots of stuff in the Riverside. And I came into the Southside, and it was just like a calm, peaceful place. And I just settled in at the back and disappeared. And church can be a refuge. And sometimes you need it to be a refuge. And that's a good thing. It talks about that, but it shouldn't become a long-term place to hide. That's not good. So I'm going to skip away. So I'm going to look at a useful for 2 Peter 1, chapter verse 5. So we're skipping away, and this is a kind of supposition, but this is maybe my story rather than, and it may or may not be Caleb's story. But in verse 5 of 2 Peter 1, it says, "For this very reason, make every effort to add to your faith goodness, and to goodness knowledge, and to knowledge self-control, and to self-control perseverance, and to perseverance godliness, and to godliness mutual affection, and to mutual affection love. For if you possess these qualities in increasing measure, they will keep you from being ineffective and unproductive in your knowledge of the Lord Jesus Christ." So verses talk about making every effort, to make every effort to grow spiritually. And I look back at the times that I disappeared. They were times when I stopped making every effort to grow. And we all know when we make every effort and when we don't. It's why I like racing. It's why I like doing weights. And a key principle for me is am I changing? So here's a photo. When I do a park run, I cannot go easy. This is a long time ago. Nick has lost a huge amount of weight since then. Well done, Nick. Pete's got faster. I've got slower. This is us. This is a Wednesday weights. Quite often it's on a Thursday. Nick is now a beast of this. We've been doing it about 6-7 months. And we were complete amateurs. We really were. We had no idea what we were doing. And Nick just keeps on. Sneaky Nick, he just puts extra weight on every time you go there. And suddenly you think, you've done one rep of 10 on the bench. And you just go, oh, and then you look after you do one and you think Nick's put on another 5 kilos onto it. Sneaky Nick. And there's Alex, who's a friend who's been coming along, who just got baptized a few weeks ago. Harry's been coming along as well. I've got another mate. It's great, but I love it because when you're there with the bros doing the weights, you make every effort. If you're being sketchy, everyone sees immediately. We also do 30 burpees to start it off, which is everybody hurts burpees. It's all easy after 30 burpees, you know. But you know, or I love going out cycling with my boys, with Roger and Rich, or anyone else as well. And then again, you know whether you're making every effort, you know when you're not. I don't have a photo of being in a Bible study because we don't tend to do one, but it was amazing to be in a study with Harry. And this is another area that we can make every effort, studying the Bible. You know, this is what I've been doing, and digging deep and, like, you know, really pushing yourself. Making every effort is a good question to ask. Are we making every effort in our spiritual walk? Another one is, have I become ineffective and unproductive? That's the other one from it. And I realized that when I went quiet, when I hid in the background, what was I doing? What was I doing for God in his church in terms of being productive, being effective? And I wasn't really. And I missed it. I really missed not having a purpose in church. I missed that comradeship that comes, fellow soldiers fighting alongside me. I missed the fellowship of being in the leadership classes, you know, I missed preparing classes. I missed not studying the Bible with people. So this point is actually for people who, have you disappeared? You know, it's great to fight for people's souls. It was amazing to go to study discipleship with young Harry, a couple of weeks ago. And he's doing great. I messaged him today. He's in South Korea with work. He's meeting up with the church. He's been out hiking in the mountains, feeling close to God. He's doing great. And he's, despite significant challenges. And it was great. And I remembered back a few years ago when I had disappeared, that it had been years since I'd been in a Bible study. And then Paul and Ian Moley, they persuaded me to join some studies. And I sat in a study and go, actually, I know how to do this. And then a week or two later, Ian called me up about 4:00. I'd arranged to be in this study with a guy. And about 4:00, Ian said, you're going to lead it. I'm like, what? Yeah, you're going to lead the study on baptism. And he did it in a way that Ian had that method of doing it. So, and it happens that baptism is my favorite study, Bible study. So I did it and it was great. And it just got my confidence back. And it's good to have mates. It's good to be pushed. It's good to be effective and productive. And so it was, you know, it was great to meet with Tim and study discipleship with Harry. And it wasn't a complete disaster, I don't think, because he's a disciple. But in terms of disappearing and getting back, I think the big thing was I did actually speak to a lot of people. I came to the realization I had hid and I was disappeared into the background and I'd lost my purpose. And for me, it was really helpful to just ask lots of people. And I don't know if their advice they gave me was really that helpful, but just to ask. And I think God helped me to find my way back. Ineffective and unproductive. So the question is from this one is, and this may not be strictly from the message of Caleb, but I think it's from the Bible, is have you disappeared? And if so, what are you going to do about it? Third point, following God wholeheartedly in old age. Come on. we're getting older. Some of us more rapidly than others, it feels like. I'm 53 now. I'm chatting to Amanda about retirement. That's weird. I love what I do as an architect, but it's hard. I deal with grumpy contractors all the time, and they're very, very demanding. I was having lunch, and then my contractor client, because I'm Novate, that means I work for a contractor, the job. And in Croydon, sunny Croydon, the big red building in Croydon. And he was like, Dean, this. So I didn't get my lunch for about half an hour with my son because he wanted it now. It's hard. And I wanted to retire at 60. That was my thing. And Amanda's told me I can't because our finances, I can't pay off the mortgage until I'm at least 62 or 63. And I'm like, that's another 10 years. But it's funny to talk about retirement. It's funny to think also, what next? What do you do afterwards? What am I going to do for God? How am I going to spend my time? And I think Caleb is a great example of retirement, So we last heard of him in Kadesh Barnea, remember? And for 40 years, the Israelites had wandered around in circles in the Sinai Peninsula, and all his friends had died. And then they'd crossed the Jordan, attacked some kings, and now 45 years later, out of nowhere, Caleb jumps back. And so we move to Joshua, chapter 14. So it's still chapter 14, but it's Joshua, a different book. And Caleb jumps back onto the scene, and we pick it up in one of my very favorite ever passages of scriptures. Joshua 14, verse 6. Now the people of Judah approached Joshua at Gilgal, and Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, said to him, you know what the Lord said to Moses, the man of God at Kadesh Barnea, about you and me. I was 40 years old when Moses, the servant of the Lord, sent me from Kadesh Barnea to explore the land, and I brought him back a report according to my convictions. But my fellow Israelites who went up with me made the hearts of the people melt in fear. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. It's that phrase again. So on that day, Moses swore to me, the land on which your feet have walked will be your inheritance and that of your children forever, because you have followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly. And so 45 years he's disappeared, and he appears brimming with conviction, energy, and he holds on to two things. I, however, followed the Lord my God wholeheartedly, and the promise that he and his children would have that inheritance forever. And these two things feel like they were important to him, remembering how he was wholehearted back then, and then creating a godly dynasty. And then it goes on in verse 10. Now then, just as the Lord promised, he's kept me alive for 45 years since the time he said to Moses, while Israel moved about in the wilderness. So here I am today, 85 years old. I am still as strong today as the day Moses sent me out. I'm just as vigorous to go out to battle now as I was then. Now give me this hill country that the Lord promised me that day. You yourselves heard that the Anakites were there and their cities were large and fortified. But the Lord helped me. I will drive them out just as he said. Then Joshua blessed Caleb, son of Jephunneh, and gave him Hebron as his inheritance. So Hebron has belonged to Caleb, son of Jephunneh, the Kenizzite, ever since, because he followed the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. Caleb speaks with just such great conviction. He speaks about how he was just as strong as he was 45 years before, that he was just as vigorous to go to battle. And we know indeed from elsewhere that indeed Caleb did go into the hill country, the Hebron hill country, and he conquered most of it. He actually needed some help, so he came to a deal, and he gave, and he had the help of this young guy, Othniel ben Kenaz, who conquered Hebron itself. And then Caleb gave his daughter Axa to Othniel, and so Caleb got to create a godly dynasty and had Hebron in the hill country. So he achieved it, and God blessed him. And we know much later, we believe there was a group called the Calebites later on, which lived on, and we know that they continued to be righteous. And it may well be that those are the descendants of Caleb. I think that's likely. How about us? There's a lot more grey hairs in the Southside than there used to be. There's a few more. I'm going to tell you a story. So there's a gang of us in the Southside who go out for bike rides. And Roger and Rich are the ones who go out the most. They're the strongest. And occasionally I try and go out with them and try and keep up. It's quite hard. And one day, Saturday, 14th of May this year, Roger planned this 115k bike ride down to Southwater and back. And we met up. That's us, just as we met up, just south of Epsom. And we had a lovely ride down. And we got, one of the things I've changed about Roger, I always stop for coffee and cake and a good natter, but the cake's important too. And that was great at the lake. I had a good deep chat. And on the way back, I was starting to struggle with to keep up, which has happened most times. And Richard was at the front. Now that's a disaster for me because he is so strong. He doesn't know slow, Richard. He just goes and goes. And we were flying, and Richard was going, and Roger was behind him, and I was right on because I'm trying to slipstream behind, and it's the only thing. If I lose Roger's wheel, then I'm gone. And suddenly, Roger hit a pothole in the wall in the road, and he went flying. And I desperately tried to get around him, but I was just there, and I hit his bike, and then I hit Roger, and I just went flying across the road, going, where am I going to land? And I landed. And I couldn't move. I was like, we were going fast. I later found out we were doing 39 kilometers an hour when we landed. And I'm lying there, and I look up. I just closed my eyes, and there is Roger, and he's already standing up, and he's covered in blood. He's just like drenched in blood, and I'm like, what's going on? That's Roger's leg. And but it was okay because the bikes were okay. And it was also the second car on the scene was a horse vet. And the horse vet took one look at Roger and went, oh, yeah, that's fine. And she was on her way to treat a horse. So she treated Rog, put up his leg, washed him down, and Roger got back on his bike and cycled 25 kilometers back home. And then he went to a hospital, well, Rosie forced him to, and gave him 7 stitches in the leg. And bizarrely enough, he then 2 weeks later did then Ride London, which is the biggest bike race in the world, 25,000 people. I, on the other hand, Roger is so solid that he punctured my tyre in 2 places. He ripped it to shreds. He's just such a brute. And so I got Amanda to come and pick me up after that, which was very nice. I also love hanging out with Pete. So in April, we did this multi-day race from St. Bees in the Lake District to Robin Hood Bay on the North Sea. It's long. It's from there to there. It's a long race. And on the first day, I managed to keep up with Pete for 20 kilometers. So that's me. And that's where Pete then ran off. And it was all right. I told him to go because I was absolutely smashed. And then each day it would get in, and I'd get in at like 11 or midnight or 1 o'clock. And Pete had been there for 3 or 4 hours before. So then in the morning, I'd see him for breakfast, and I'd leave first. And then about an hour later, Pete would come flying past. We'd have a natter for a bit. And then I'd say, go on, Pete. And so it was great. And eventually we got to the end. And that's us coming down to the sea at the North Sea, having crossed England on our feet. Now, you'll notice one thing about that, is that Pete looks quite fresh. Well, I don't. And that's because Pete decided he didn't want to do day 4 and day 5. So he did them in one. He just went for 26 hours non-stop. 22 hours. There you go. 22 hours non-stop. We just went through. So he beat me by day, or 14 and a half hours, because that's Pete. Now, I love hanging out with hard men. I just, and I like hanging out with people who are tougher and stronger and harder than me. And Caleb was undeniably physically strong. At 85, he can still go up and say, I'm going to conquer this land. And he went up and did it. He was still spiritually on fire for God as well as physically on fire. And I think about this. These guys are spiritually strong also. Richard leads Bible talk. All his family members seem to become Christians. You can't stop them. There's so many of them becoming Christians. Pete leads a Bible talk, one of the trustees of the church, leads a finance in Southside, lots of stuff that people don't know about. In the background, he does. Roger leads a Bible talk, leads Kids Kingdom across the whole of the UK as well. They're spiritually strong, spiritually going. And I find that when I'm physically disciplined, I also tend to be spiritually disciplined. I think there is a connection for it. For me, there is. when I'm physically disciplined, I don't give in to lust nearly as much. I don't give in to gluttony. I don't give in to unrighteous anger with my family. I'm more disciplined about prayer. I'm more disciplined about Bible study. I'm more disciplined about loving my brothers as well. The other point it talks about, and Caleb talks about, is creating a godly dynasty. You know, Richard, he's got Reuben and Kyra. You know, he's passionate about them becoming Christians. Kyra is feisty, but she's awesome. Roger, Ashley, Nicole, Ramel, all disciples, doing great. You know, Pete, Eleanor, Ned, Kay. Now Eleanor's married to Tom, and they're great disciples. Look at that! It's a dynasty. You know, he's got more than that's the Pete Frost family nowadays. He's just going to keep on growing it. You know, Roger, Rich, and Pete, they're great men of God. They're strong physically, and as they grow older, they're not losing their spiritual fervor. They inspire me. They remind me of Caleb. As you get older, are you physically and spiritually getting stronger? Or are you giving up? So, we've had a look at one of my favorite characters tonight, Caleb. You know, I want us to be inspired by him. He's a great, amazing man of God. I look forward to meeting him in heaven one day. You know, in Numbers 14 and Joshua 14, it's nice that they mirror. It talks about Caleb, and it says in Numbers 14 that he follows me wholeheartedly, and Joshua 14 that he follows the Lord, the God of Israel, wholeheartedly. He didn't change. That, if written on his tombstone, it should say, follows the Lord God wholeheartedly. What a great thing. What a great tagline to know about somebody. I think we've got time to break into groups. Yeah? And there are 3 questions I want us to ask. Who is your Joshua? Have you disappeared? If you have, what are you going to do about it? And as you get older, are you physically and spiritually getting stronger? Amen.